Hi everyone, I've got Professor Sean Cumming from the University of Bath today. He's a professor in sport and exercise science with a particular expertise in growth and maturation, which is so important for us as director of sports, obviously dealing with children. So, Sean, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your work with growth and maturation and how you think that could help directors of sport.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind invitation to chat. So I've been working in the area of growth and maturation for about 3 decades now. What I do is I look at how children grow and mature and how individual differences in terms of whether you mature early or whether you mature late has implications for selection in sport, for injury risk, but also looking at things such as physical activity and health-related behaviors. And so that's been my primary area of focus. And I've had the great fortune to work with a number of leading organisations in this area, in particular the Premier League, more recently the Scottish Football Association, who have a vested interest in this particular topic. And it's so nice to get the opportunity to actually chat to people who are working in schools, who are dealing with athletes on a regular basis, to try and share some of this insight and the best practice in this area.
That's fantastic, Sean. So, in terms of insight, what have you found in your research that would be, advantageous for directors of sport to be aware of?
Well, I think the first thing to consider is the fact that not all children grow and mature at the same age. If we think about schools, we group our children in classes for PE or in sports clubs relative to their age. We have our year sevens, our year eights, etc. But within those age groups, children of the same age can vary substantially in terms of their growth and their maturation. In fact, in the Premier League academies, we have some 9-year-olds who are biologically 12 or classic early developers who might be in the same age group as a late developer who might be biologically 6 or 7. And so you're talking about 5 to 6 years worth of biological difference. And the key thing is that the child has no control over this, whether you're an early, on time, or late developer is largely down to genetics. So, it's about choosing your mum and dad carefully. If mum and dad were early developers, it's likely you're going to be an early developer. And if they were late, it's likely you're going to be late. But being an early or late developer has huge implications, particularly from the onset of puberty, when those early developers will receive those advantages of being taller, stronger, more powerful. In a sport such as rugby or tennis or soccer, what we start to see is there's a major selection advantage and an athletic advantage associated with being an early developer. So the challenge is if you're handing out scholarships or you're trying to pick the best players for your team, you're probably not picking the best athlete, you're probably picking the earliest developing athletes, which causes a challenge in terms of opportunity and inclusion, and also an issue in terms of talent ID because you're going to select the kid on the basis of something they have very little control over. And there's no guarantee that that early developer is also going to be the best athlete at 17, 18, or 19 when all the rest of the athletes have maybe caught up with them. And unfortunately for that late developer, they might say, well, rugby, tennis, it's not for me. I'm never going to be good in that sport. And they drop out. So at least recognizing those differences is the first key thing.
And I think that's so important for directors of sport twofold, because obviously, if a girl or a boy is a late developer and we put them off sport, well, that's, possibly a great performer that we're missing out on. But I think probably more importantly, it's easy to label those children as non-sporty, not a term I'm happy with, if you like. But our job as directors of sport is to instill that lifelong passion for sport, and we could easily turn girls and boys off sport at that early age. Now, on your website, which I'll share with everyone, you've got a brilliant widget that maybe could
Mhm.
help people with measuring biological age, etc. Do you want to explain that a little bit? I'll share it in the bio below.
Yeah, certainly. In order to understand growth and maturation, the important thing is to set up systems of measurement so we can suddenly tell who is early, who's on time, and who's late, and provide the appropriate challenges for them. But we can also identify when children are going through phases of development, such as the adolescent growth spurt, where they may be more at risk of injury. We need to do a little bit be more careful in terms of load management and training prescription. So these methods that we have on the widget are exactly the same methods that we apply in the Premier League and British gymnastics, in tennis, etc. And what we do is we take regular assessments of the children every 3 to 4 months in terms of heights and weights, but we also get biological parent heights. And with that information, what we can do is we can predict the adult height of the children to about an error of 2.2 centimeters in boys and about 1.8 centimeters in girls. Now, if we happen to know what the child's current height is, we can then express their current height as a percentage of their final adult height. And that percentage value gives us a good idea of whether they're early, on time, or late relative to reference values for the population. But it also tells us when they're entering the growth spurt. So the growth spurt typically starts at about 85% of adult height, peaks at around 90 to 91, and then comes back down at 95 or 96% of adult stature. Now, of course, if we're looking at two boys and one is at, say, 12 years of age and is at 90% of adult stature, but one's only at 80, well, we know that one is more advanced in their development than the other. And that one who's advanced is probably having the success of, being more athletic, stronger, more powerful, bigger, taller at that point of time. The sort of boy who's going to succeed in tennis, rugby, those types of sports, which will require those types of things. And of course, in the Premier League, we use this information to better understand the athletes. Now, a lot of people think it's all about saving those late developers. Yeah, we want to retain those late developers, give them the optimal challenges. But likewise, you can argue that the early developers need this as well because an early developing boy or a girl will rely on their bigger size, will rely on their greater mass, will rely on their greater strength or power. And the problem is that they don't have to develop the technical or the tactical or psychological skills which are going to be necessary for them to succeed at the adult level. And this is the problem. A lot of those boys identified as being the next big thing in the England under 16s or the junior squads. They're great at 15 or 16 because they're early developers. They don't grow any more beyond that often. And eventually, when the other lads or the girls catch up with them, they're really lacking because they haven't developed the necessary skills and they no longer have those physical advantages. Now, if a late developer can stay in the system, fantastic. They will eventually go on and they'll probably succeed. But the problem is there are very, very few of those late developers. In fact, in the Scottish system for the football academies, beyond 14 years of age, we found no late developers, and that was out of a sample of over 1,000 kids in the Scottish academies. In fact, last year there were more sightings of the Loch Ness Monster than there were of late developers in the Scottish academy system. And that just shows you the extent of the problem. And similarly in rugby, I think in the Scottish rugby, for the under 15s, we found only 2 of 800 who were late developers. So you're talking about 0.2% when there should be about 15% of them in the normal population. So this is how big these maturity biases have. And I'm sure they're equally influencing things such as the scholarships which are being handed out at school. So if you are a director of sport and you're picking those best athletes who are turning up at 11 or 12, you're probably going for those early developing boys and girls who have those advantages at that point of time. And yes, they'll be great at 12, 13, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be the best athlete in the long term. So yeah, very important to take these things into consideration.
Brilliant, lots to think about there. So I think what we should be advocating for our directors of sport is that you need strategies for your
Yep.
early developers and your late developers. You talked about appropriate challenges, Sean. So could
Yes.
you just give us a few appropriate challenges that
Yep.
we should be considering for early developers and for late developers, please?
Yep. So in the Premier League, what we would do with the early developers is often we might play them across an age group. So the say he's an under 14, but he's an early developer. Every now and then we might test him in the under 15s where he's competing against boys who he's physically matched with. In contrast with a late developer, we may play them down an age group for certain points to put them in a different environment where they can maybe use their physicality and use some of those skills. Because we find that if we keep them in their age group, well, they don't get the same game minutes. They're meant to get the same game minutes, but they're getting over the season anywhere between 400 to 1,000 less minutes in terms of opportunity to play. But by playing them up or playing them down, it presents new challenges for them. And of course, the thing we're well known for in both in rugby now, but also in terms of soccer, is the concept of biobanding,
Mm.
where every now and then we will actually group the kids by their biological ages. So that early developing boy will not have the advantage. They're playing against older, smarter kids who are physically matched. They're going to have to scan more. They're going to have to use their technical and tactical skills to succeed. And they're also going to fail. And
Mm.
Failure is actually really, really valuable. You can learn a lot from failure. But if all you ever do is win, 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 then you don't really develop a work ethic or some of the other key skills. So
Yeah.
the bio banding for the early developers is probably actually even more benefit for them for the late developers. For those late developers, when we bio band them, we find that they take on leadership positions, they command the game for once, they can use their physicality, they can actually develop and really show their skill sets. And again, with bio banding, it's important to consider that it's not a replacement for age group. Age group is important because age group matches kids on experience, training age, motor skills, cognitive, social development. But every now and then we match them on the biological just to test them in different ways, to allow the coaches to see them in a different environment. Okay, he's an early maturing boy, he's good in his age group, but he's also good when we push him up. Do we maybe find some weaknesses where we need to work on his game? And then the Premier League academies, what they'll also do is have the sports psych support. So if an early developer is going up, he's going to be taught about failure. You want to prep them for this challenge to say,
Yeah.
look, it's not going to be easy,
Yeah.
but this is how you're going to go through it. Learn from those older boys. They're going to mentor you. They're going to teach you. It's a bit like a mixed stage classrooms, and we know the effect of mixed stage classrooms are incredibly successful from the work of Vygotsky, etc. And likewise with late developers, as I said, when you go in, you teach them that they're going to be the leader this time, something they're probably not in their age group, but somewhere where they get an opportunity to mentor, to teach. And one of the best ways of learning, I'm sure you're aware of this, is to consolidate your learning through teaching. Certainly my own experiences in sport or in coaching or teaching has been from teaching others certain types of
Yeah.
things. That's when you really learn a concept. And when we've done these bio-banded events, both in rugby and in football, the kids love it, but for very, very different reasons because they're getting new challenges. And as I said, it doesn't replace age groups. It's something that you just mix up the sort of a learning environment just to give kids these diverse different types of contexts, whether it be out of balance competitions, player-led festivals, or biobanding. The more different sort of experiences children get, the better they'll be in terms of their overall development.
That's brilliant, Sean. Some great tips there. And I think, I would follow that up by saying for directors of sport, please go and, view Sean's work. I'll share the information below. And, you should definitely have strategies for your
Yeah.
early and late developers. And very kindly, Sean's offer to follow this up later with some more Tuesday takeaways because it's such a massive topic. So just want to say thank you so much for your time this morning, Sean, and hopefully we can touch base later on and develop some of these ideas further.
Yep, more than happy to chat. And thanks again for the invitation. It's really nice to get the opportunity to share this information with the schools.